February 21st, 2018. Commissioner Saltzman is interested in participating by phone for this meeting, so there's some formal announcements that need to be made prior to that. First of all, pursuant to PCC 3.02.025, Commissioner Saltzman is participating by telephone because of weather conditions, and without Commissioner Saltzman's participation by telephone, there is not a sufficient number of council members present to conduct all of the city's business. This morning, the Office of Commissioner Fritz was contacted to inform her that she could participate in this council hearing by phone. Commissioner Fritz is unable to do so today. Do any council members who are physically present object to having Commissioner Saltzman participate by phone? That's you. Any objections, Nick?
I waive all my objections.
He waives his objections. There are no objections. Please call the roll.
Fritz, Fish,
Aye, or here, excuse me.
Saltzman, Udaley, Wheeler.
Here. Council meets on a regular basis to conduct the city's business. Preserving order and decorum allows everyone a chance to provide meaningful input to the city council, to maintain decorum and to make sure that everybody feels welcome and respected and safe. We have some basic rules. To participate in council meetings, you may sign up in advance with the council clerk for communications to briefly speak about any subject that you'd like to speak about. You may also sign up for public testimony on resolutions and first readings of ordinances. Your testimony must address the matter being considered at the time. Please state your name for the record. We don't need your full address. Please disclose if you're a lobbyist. If you're representing an organization, please identify that organization. Okay. The council presiding officer, that's me today, determines the length of the testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. When you have 30 seconds left, the yellow light goes on in front of you. When your time is up, the red light goes on. Please finish your comments by the time the red light goes on. Disruptive conduct, such as shouting, interrupting testimony, or council deliberations is not allowed for obvious reasons. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given. Further disruptions may subject the person to ejection for the remainder of the meeting. If you are being ejected and fail to leave, you are subject to arrest for trespasses. Simple thumbs up or thumbs down is sufficient if you like something or don't like something, respectively. So with that,
Mayor?
Commissioner Fish.
Mayor, we have a lot of people in chambers today, which means they were able to get from their homes to City Hall. We're going to have 3 members of council here this morning, which means they were able to get from their homes to you and I were able to get here from a place that where the roads are typically challenged when we have a snowstorm. Can we take a moment to just acknowledge and thank Commissioner Saltzman and all the hardworking members of the Portland Bureau of Transportation for their work over the last 24 hours?
That would be a great thing to do, and I'd like to second that. We have had crews out since yesterday morning. In fact, a little bit before that time. They've been out all night. We have had people working and volunteering in our homeless shelters, including severe weather shelters that we have opened for the occasion. We have our utility bureaus working round the clock to make sure that our water and sewer services continue to be maintained. And I want to join Commissioner Fish in thanking Transportation Commissioner Saltzman and Utilities Commissioner Fish and all of our fantastic city employees for their hard work.
You're here.
Carla, if I am looking at this screen correctly, do we not have...
Just your screens are not
it's
working.
It's just ours, but we have closed caption working. Yes. Why don't we go ahead and start with communications, please? And I also want to thank all the council staffs who are present in chamber today, too. Thank you, chiefs. It's good to see you all here as a group.
Item 153, request of Sandra Shotwell to address council regarding Eastmoreland Neighborhood Association spending funds to pursue historic designations.
Good morning. Thank you for being here.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and councilors. My name is Sandra Shotwell. I'm fortunate to have been a resident of Portland for 25 years in Eastmoreland. If I were to move here today, I don't think I could afford my home. So happy to have purchased it earlier. And housing and the pressure on housing and concerns about affordability are really the issues that I know are important to you and that I want to address. There is an odd situation which occurs because of an inappropriate connection between an honorary National Historic Register designation, which comes with voluntary guidelines, and Oregon law. On the second page of the handout, which I hope you have in front of you, is an Oregon law which was designed to ensure that homeowners are not placed in a historic designation district unless they consent. And there was, at the time, an exception because the National Register Historic District is a voluntary and honorary designation, and they didn't want to prevent neighborhoods from being able to go in there. I believe that it has created a loophole that people have taken advantage of to place their neighbors into historic districts which come with design historic resource guideline review, demolition review. It adds time and expense and delay to taking care of your older home. In our district, for example, our board used $50,000 plus of neighborhood association monies. Only wealthy neighborhoods can afford this consulting that's required, and applied to the National Park Service for a designation. It was not something where they necessarily were sure they had support of the neighborhood. When they took a vote 3 months later after submitting the application, in fact, 2/3 of the neighbors voted. That's a pretty good turnout on an election. And it was close, but more people were opposed to the district than supported it. They went forward. Why? Anyone, literally, I could put one of your neighborhoods into a National Historic District if I appropriate reviewed it, because it's meant to be honorary, it's meant to be voluntary. And unfortunately, in Oregon, the only state in the country, it comes with resource review, which, as I said, adds to the cost of taking care of an older home. Our local districts, in contrast, you actually have to get people to say, yes, I would like to be part of this district. And those also come with guidelines. I'll point out one distinction. Demolition review is a funny issue. People don't like to see these older homes demolished, I think, I think few of us do, unless they're really in bad shape. Sometimes they need to be. So demolition review is something that many people like. I think a broader category of people might like. But our local historic districts don't have it. So the combination of historic district review, I've made a couple of requests to the council. If you look at them, I'd appreciate it if, when national designation comes up, the council would agree that there should only be voluntary guidelines, which is what the National Park Service suggested.
First, can I just say thank you very much for the handout. When we get a handout that's as clear as this and has the attachment, it makes our job easier. And you've raised a couple of issues that, frankly, I'm not as clear about, the distinction between the two kinds of designations and where the rules are. So I think we're going to want to dive into this a little bit and make sure we understand it and have staff explain this to us and then get back to you. But thank you for highlighting this issue.
Thank you for your attention.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Next individual, please, Carla.
Item 154, request of Brian Houle to address council regarding Bureau of Transportation Greenways diverter to be installed at 50th and Southeast Lincoln Street.
I don't see Mr. Houle. Next individual, please.
155, request of Lisa Brockmiller to address council regarding Bureau of Transportation Greenways diverter to be installed at 50th and Southeast Lincoln Street.
Mayor, may I make a suggestion? It's quite possible that both of these individuals were not able to get here because of transportation-related issues and the snowstorm, and I would urge us in this instance to consider, if they choose, to add them to next week's agenda, even if it means suspending the rules and having 2 additional public comments.
I would be fine with that. And it's my understanding that Mr. Houle and Ms. Brockmiller were planning on testifying together on the same subject, so I'd be fine with that.
Carla, can we do that? Can we suspend the rules and add 2?
If we need 4 people to suspend the rules, correct, Lauren?
Right.
Well, let's do this. We'll work with them to bring them back at a later date.
That's what the policy says now.
Very
We give
good.
them the first available spot.
Okay, very
thank
good. Next individual, please.
Item 156, request of David Keefe Davis to address council regarding suppression of First Amendment rights of protesters, citizens, cop watchers, citizen journalists, whistleblowers, and activists by the city.
I do not see Mr. Davis. Next individual, please.
Item 157, request of Kevin Fitz to address council regarding the city's relationship with Home Forward.
Good morning.
Good morning. Oh, crap. Let me get situated. Good morning, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners. For the record, my name is Kevin Fitz. I head a nonprofit called the Oregon Mental Health Consumer Association, but I'm not here representing them today. I'm just speaking as a citizen of Portland.
Thank you.
I have 3 minutes, and I just want to take 10 seconds to say, I am particularly impacted as a low-income person living with severe mental illness of the burdens of economic issues, et cetera, and struggle to get my voice heard in policy. But I am impacted so significantly in the last couple of years by the death of my parents, the death of my nephew Garrett, of Matthew by opiate overdose, my other nephew in Eastern Oregon State Prison due to eviction and opiate problems, and my sister-in-law suffering with acute leukemia in Swedish Hospital in downtown Seattle. And so they are in my thoughts. I came here to talk to you about the issue of the City of Portland's oversight and connection to the public housing authority called Home Forward. In 1992, you signed an agreement, intergovernmental agreement with then Housing Authority of Portland to give them some authority to run the public housing authority in Portland with issues of your appointing 4 of the governing board of that, and the Multnomah County 2 and the City of Gresham 2. It is the issue that I have currently as a tenant of this public housing authority and being able to get my needs met consequentially from a staff that is challenged by tremendous turnover, stress, and high client loads. I have filed a complaint with the Housing and Urban Development Office of Fair Housing in Seattle, and I am seeking an attorney to seek support for what I see as discrimination around my rights as a tenant. And I've also reached out to Dennis Richardson's office and Representative Walden's office for support at a federal level with HUD and at the state level with the oversight and audit of that public entity, the Home Forward. So to that end, I would like to ask for your support with your interim housing director to see if we could get somebody to help me deal with some of these issues. I don't want to air this laundry publicly, but just some of these issues I'm having as a tenant and getting my needs met. I just would like just to take the last 10 seconds and have a moment of silence for people who are in pain and suffering with health issues or opiate issues or houselessness issues.
Mr. Fitz, can I ask you a question? As you know, there is a position on the board of directors for Home Forward set aside for a resident. And that's a very important position because the perspective of the resident is often, I think, overlooked or shortchanged in decision-making. Have you considered at some point whether you would put your name forward in nomination for a for that position in the future?
It's an interesting question. One of the things that I do in my day job is I work to loosen the grip of what I call benevolent paternalism. Particularly, one of the issues we're facing nationally is the description between what we call the administrative bureaucratic blue church on the Democratic side and what they call on the Republican side the grassroots activists of the red religion. And so what we're trying to challenge is how do we get the voice of the consumer more involved in these policy and governance boards that moves beyond just tokenism or becoming a bureaucratic mascot or an administrative lapdog. And so some of those things we're trying to challenge. I have considered it. I have so much other things to do legislatively around mental health and consumer issues. I have thought about it. So I have issues with, they have to have an administrative plan they're supposed to show and let all the tenants know about every year. They're supposed to publish when their resident advisory council meets to the public every other month, stuff like that. And I know they're short-staffed and they're stressed. The epidemic of houselessness and homelessness and trying to provide housing services for people in poverty with disabilities is a tall order. So.
Well, and I'm not here to alibi for Home Forward, but I will tell you that given the president's budget that he just put on the table, president's budget eliminates, for example, any capital funding to housing authorities across the country to maintain the stock of public housing, wipes it out in order to cover the costs, in order to pay for the tax cut and the wall. It severely cuts back on voucher programs, which we desperately need. And since you mentioned the Office of Fair Housing, it significantly cuts funding for fair housing. Overall, it proposes an 18% cut in HUD, which would be a wipeout from our point of view. So anyway, thank you for coming forward today, and I'm sure the city and the housing commissioner can get more details about your complaint.
Just to follow up, it was particularly under Reagan who cut 60% of HUD funding from the federal budget long time ago, and it's been no add back since, and it is disastrous.
I think just one final point on this. People sometimes, and more now than ever, have raised the question of what should be the federal role in housing. No one questions the fact that we have $200 billion in foregone revenue by offering tax breaks to people who don't need it. And that's the value of providing people like Bill Gates with a deduction for his mortgage and his taxes. Mr. Gates does not need that break. But that's to the tune of $200 billion. Our total federal budget to help people shut out of the marketplace, which is over 50 million Americans, is $40 billion. So our priorities are completely reversed. And this budget will do even more damage. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Carla, have any items been pulled from the consent agenda?
Oh, we've had no requests.
Please call the roll, please.
Fish,
Aye.
Saltzman. Aye. Udaly,
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. Consent agenda is adopted. Please call item 171.
Authorize the city attorney to take legal action against certain opioid manufacturers and distributors and other appropriate parties to recover public funds that have been and will be expended by the city as a result of the manufacture and distribution of prescription opioids.
So this is a resolution being brought forward by all 5 members of the Portland City Council, and that should underscore the importance of this issue. As everyone is keenly aware, and as our last communications just highlighted, America is in the throes of an opioid epidemic. According to the CDC, opioids, including prescription opioids, killed more than 42,000 people in 2016. That's more than any year on record, and 40% of those deaths were due to prescription opioids. That's more than any year on record. I want to underscore that point, and my suspicion is that when 2017 is tallied, the results are going to be even worse. This crisis is felt acutely here in the state of Oregon. I want to give you a statistic that I heard for the first time just last week. Last year in the state of Oregon, 55 opioids were prescribed for every man, woman, and child in the state of Oregon. 55. So if you didn't use your 55, somebody else did. And as significant as that number is, 55 for every man, woman, and child in the state of Oregon, that's actually down from its high of about 75 prescriptions for every man, woman, and child in Oregon. According to the Oregon Health Authority, 3 Oregonians die every week due to prescription opioid use. Further, we know that opioid abuse is a major contributor to homelessness, with chronic homelessness on the rise in our community and many of those experiencing homelessness reporting addiction issues. Local jurisdictions like the City of Portland are on the front lines of the opioid crisis. We're investing record amounts to address homelessness. We've committed to dramatically increasing the number of supporting housing units in our community, many of which will go to those suffering addiction issues. Our police officers respond to an increasing number of drug-related calls for service. Our firefighters provide life-saving medication to overdose victims. Opioid addiction can even contribute to higher care costs for the city. At the same time, drug manufacturers have shown a reckless disregard for the danger their products pose. Drug companies continue to take in profits while cities like Portland are faced with significant budget shortfalls. This resolution will authorize action by the city to recoup some of the funds we spent due to opioid addiction while holding drug manufacturers accountable. This is a much-needed step to help stem the tide of opioid addiction in our community. Thank you and welcome.
Good morning, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners. A lot of what I plan to say, I think Mayor Wheeler just shared, but I'll go over.
Feel free to say it again.
I might say some of it again. My name is Naomi Sheffield. I'm a Deputy City Attorney. I handle complex litigation for the city, and I'm here today to discuss the resolution authorizing the City Attorney to proceed with affirmative litigation against both the opioid manufacturers and distributors. And I'll cover 3 areas and then address any questions you have if I'm able to. So I wanted to first address what the opioid epidemic is and how it's affected Oregon and Portland, the role that prescription drug manufacturers and distributors have played in the opioid epidemic, and then the causes of action that the city might bring, and how the litigation would likely play out. So the opioid epidemic, broadly speaking, is characterized by the significant increase in abuse of prescription and non-prescription opioids since about 2000. The National Survey for Drug Use and Health in 2010 showed that approximately 12 million Americans reported using painkillers for non-medical purposes. This abuse has led to a 3-fold increase in overdose deaths in the last 15 years. And as Mayor Wheeler was saying, a significant increase just in total opioid prescription overdoses as well during that period. And Oregon has similarly seen an increase in overdose hospitalizations and deaths during this period. Across the country, states, counties, cities, public hospitals, families, and others have borne the cost of this epidemic. The state and local governments are forced to pay directly for increased prescription opioids, for medical treatment and addiction services, for drug treatment, and they also indirectly pay the costs for increased crime, housing issues, and jails. Billions of dollars are spent annually across the United States to address the epidemic, and these costs don't even take into account the economic and non-economic impacts that the epidemic has had on communities. The City of Portland has incurred costs, as Mayor Wheeler discussed, in several areas, including but not limited to Portland Fire and Rescue. In 2016, responded to 3,475 calls for overdoses and administered over 400 doses of naloxone, which is the medication designed to reverse an opioid overdose. Additionally, approximately 50% of the calls that are addressed by Portland Police Bureau's Drug and Vice Division related to drugs are related to opioids. The city also, as you are all well aware, invests millions of dollars in the Joint Office of Homelessness Services, which, in addition to many of the programming that it provides supportive housing services that assist people living with drug addiction. And finally, the city directly incurs costs as a self-insured provider for its employees and their families, so paying for prescription drugs and for the cost of treatment that employees and family members who are addicted to opioids. The public health crisis corresponds with the massive increase in prescription opioid sales. I I actually think that Mayor Wheeler's numbers might have been for Multnomah County, because I think Oregon actually peaked at 101.2 prescription drugs for every 100 people in the year 2010.
So you're saying I was being too optimistic?
Well, Multnomah County, I think, were your numbers. If I don't have Multnomah counties right here, but I'm pretty sure that's right.
Either way,
they are
it
going
paints a
down, which
dire
is a good
picture.
thing, but it has been high, and it increased, peaking right around 2010 to 2012 around the country and in Oregon. Prescription opioid manufacturers have each made and continue to make billions of dollars annually on the sale of prescription opioids. These same manufacturers were the ones who encouraged the use of long-term use of opioids to treat chronic pain, and at the same time downplayed the risks of addiction related to higher dosage and long-term use of prescription opioids. These manufacturers marketed to doctors and patients, encouraging a greater use of opioids to address non-cancer pain. The distributors, who are also the subject of the resolution, there are approximately 3 distributors who dominate the market share, and all distributors have a legal obligation to monitor the ordering and dispersal of prescription opioids to make sure that they aren't diverted into the community. And all 3 major manufacturers have had action taken against them by federal and state agencies due to their failure to uphold those obligations to monitor and report the diversion of opioids or suspicious behavior. So the litigation, hundreds of cities, I think about 370 at this point, and counties around the country have sued the manufacturers and distributors in federal court or in state court and have been removed. And these cases, in December of 2017, a multi-district litigation was formed, and these cases were transferred to the Northern District of Ohio. So if the city were to file suit, we would likely be transferred into the multi-district litigation in the Northern District of Ohio. The cases set forth various causes of action depending on state law and the harms faced by the individual jurisdictions, but the city would likely allege causes of action for public nuisance, negligence, and RICO and Oregon RICO. The multi-district litigation is moving forward quickly. I think there's an expectation that the judge would like to push for a resolution, and so action at this point in time would be very timely. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I have a
Commissioner
couple
Fish.
questions. So the way we would structure this particular litigation is that we would handle it in-house?
We would not. We would handle, there are a number of outside firms, and one of the firms that we've worked with before for the Monsanto litigation has about 60, I think, jurisdictions. So we would have an outside firm that has a number of other cases going
But we
forward.
piggyback off of the existing, and then our city attorney's office would monitor the litigation.
Correct.
And you mentioned that that there's a number of claims which have been asserted, including RICO, which I believe is a criminal conspiracy charge, as well as some other related claims. What are the potential damages that we can recover, and what do we have to prove as a city in terms of getting a recovery?
So just so you know, the RICO charges, there is criminal RICO, but these would be civil RICO charges. So
Civil conspiracy.
Civil conspiracy, yeah, exactly. So there are the potential, I mean, I think the potential damages that the city has probably looks to be in the millions of dollars, and the recoverable damages will vary based on a number of factors. First of all, I mean, the total damages across the United States probably far exceed what the distributors and manufacturers are ultimately going to be able to pay. So there's obviously going to be some, if there's a settlement, some reduction because of that. But in terms of the damages, again, the kind of what I discussed are the likely damages, and I think we are looking at a few $1 million annually, and looking backwards. So for a nuisance claim, we would be kind of proving that the city would prove that they created, for the negligence claim, they'd be proving that they had an obligation to kind of meet certain standards, and they acted negligently and caused the harm. And I think for the manufacturers, we're looking at a lot of what they've said, and one of the causes of action that other people have brought are consumer deception claims. So a lot of the advertising and selling and pushing of these drugs to doctors and patients have, I think, is the basis of the negligence claim, that kind of pushing it has been negligent.
And also, is the Attorney General involved in this litigation?
So my understanding right now is the Oregon Attorney General is involved in a multi-state investigation under the Consumer Protection Act.
Okay.
I don't believe they filed suit. Some states have filed suit, but I don't believe Oregon has at this point. And the state would not be in federal litigation because the state,
Right.
it wouldn't be removed to federal court.
So what we're talking about is a multi-pronged approach to recover damages on the basis of the harm caused by the misconduct of these companies.
Correct. So and obviously Multnomah County has filed because of their harms. They have been removed to federal court and transferred to the Northern District of Ohio. Yeah, so it's multi-pronged and then multi-theory. Again, the state will likely pursue a different legal theory because they have different legal theories available to them.
I just make one personal observation because I have, I'm currently, with my health challenges, I have about 3 pages of single-space drugs that I take at various times. And something that I've learned about the drugs that really pack a wallop is the smaller the pill, sometimes the bigger the mischief. Mm-hmm. And, OxyContin is a very small pill, and yet has enormous consequences when you take it. Another example of that is steroids. The steroid pill is a tiny little pill which completely turns your nervous system upside down. And it is remarkable how liberally they are prescribed in our country for various laudable purposes, but they are given out very easily, and they have huge impacts on people's behavior. So thank you.
Very good. Commissioner Saltzman, did you have any questions?
No, I didn't.
Very good. Public testimony? Does that complete your presentation?
That's all.
Very good. Public testimony on this item, Carla?
Yes, we have 4 people signed up. The first 3 are Mary Sipe, Steve Novick, and Shedrick J. Wilkins.
Good morning. And Carla, could you just confirm for me the main monitors and the...
It is still working
Still
up here.
working,
They're
thank you.
working on it.
Good. Good morning, Mary.
Good
Why don't
morning.
you start us off today?
Mary Sipe. Deadliest drug epidemic in U.S. history. That's what we're dealing with. For years while working in the healthcare field, I've watched the opioid manufacturers, motivated by their obscene profits, push their highly addictive, dangerous drugs using deceptive marketing to encourage physicians to overprescribe. Shortly after these drugs were approved by the FDA, the drug manufacturers convinced the medical community to establish pain as a vital sign. Each time a patient is seen, they're asked to rate their pain and how effectively their provider treated their pain. Physicians and hospitals were evaluated on how effectively they treated patients' pain. Pain clinics began cropping up everywhere. The drug manufacturers knowingly misrepresented the serious risks of addiction. As a result of this corporate greed, we now are in the midst of the worst drug epidemic in American history. Thousands of unsuspecting victims of this corporate greed are now sleeping on the streets, their lives destroyed. I commend City Council for bringing this resolution forward. It's time that these manufacturers and distributors were held accountable. The cost of this epidemic should not be on the shoulders of taxpayers. One would think that our regulatory agencies would protect citizens from this unconscionable behavior, but that's not the case. Last October, 60 Minutes did a story about how the opioid crisis was allowed to spread, aided by Congress, lobbyists, and a drug distribution industry that shipped almost unchecked hundreds of millions of pills to rogue pharmacies and pain clinics. Joe Ranzini, who ran the DEA's Office of Diversion Control, the division that regulates and investigates pharmaceutical industry, reported how the drug industry used their money and influence to pressure top lawyers at the DEA to take a softer approach and managed to push him out. He tells of how a parade of DEA lawyers switched sides and jumped to high-paying jobs, defending the drug industry and seriously undermining the work of the enforcement agency. This past Sunday, 60 Minutes did another story about how opioid makers gave $10 million to advocacy groups, which in turn promote these medications. In April of 2016, Congress effectively stripped the Drug Enforcement Administration of its most potent weapon against large drug companies suspected of spilling prescription narcotics onto the nation's streets. The chief advocate of the law that hobbled the DEA was Representative Tom Marino, a Pennsylvania Republican. Marino was President Trump's nominee to become the nation's next drug czar. He spent years trying to move the law forward in Congress. According to federal filings, $120 million was spent by major drug industry companies, distributors, chain drugstores, and pharmaceutical manufacturers lobbying Congress on this bill and other legislation. With all the money and influence supporting the drug industry, this is going to be a tough battle, but we have to start somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Steve Novick, and I'm here today because I lost my brother Misha to OxyContin. I'm here to ask you to amend this resolution to add some language holding some individuals accountable. The New Yorker and Esquire magazines recently detailed the extensive personal involvement of members of the Sackler family, the founding family of Purdue Pharma, in the deceptive and aggressive marketing of OxyContin. The Sackler family, through contributions to various cultural and educational institutions, including the Guggenheim, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and both Harvard and Yale universities, have their name plastered all over those storied institutions. There is a movement to try to get those institutions to remove the Sackler family name from those buildings, programs, and professorships. And I'm here to ask you to join that movement. I don't see why the Sackler family isn't in prison, but public shaming seems to be one way that we can address them. So what the amendment that I propose that Carla has distributed is to add a couple of whereases and a be it further resolved. Whereas members of the Sackler family, which founded Purdue Pharma, makers of OxyContin, including Richard Sackler, were deeply and personally involved in the deceptive marketing of OxyContin. Whereas the Sackler family name has been lionized by numerous major cultural and educational institutions, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Guggenheim, and both Harvard and Yale universities. And then be it further resolved that the council urges all cultural and educational institutions to remove the Sackler family name from any and all exhibits, buildings, professorships, and programs where it is featured, and to refuse any new contributions from the Sackler family.
Mayor Wheeler,
Commissioner Fish.
As a courtesy to a former colleague who's offered an amendment, I would like to move the amendment, ask for a second so there can be council discussion after the testimony.
Second.
Commissioner Fish moves. Commissioner Udaley seconds.
Steve?
Well, I've said what I intended to say. I mean, I really appreciate the motion and the second, and I would very much appreciate the city council taking this action. These are people who, the Sackler family is a family of, frankly, mass murderers. They recklessly promoted this drug, knowing it to be dangerous, and as a result, people died. In many states, that's part of the definition of second-degree murder. Apparently, they're not going to be prosecuted for second-degree murder, but it's outrageous that they have their names lionized in so many cultural and educational institutions. And I hope that many thousands of people and institutions throughout the country will call on those institutions to remove the Sackler family name from their buildings, programs, and professorships. So I would, as the brother of Misha, who died of an OxyContin overdose in May 2007, I ask you to take this action to in some way hold these individuals personally responsible for their actions.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it. Good morning.
Oh,
It's
I'm
you.
sorry to say I have a head cold, Mr. Mayor. I can't hear what people are saying. That's why I wasn't here last week. So I should take some Sudafed, which is not an opioid, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, I do believe that pills, people that take pills, this is a part of a philosophy of rampant materialism. You think that if you have a lot of stuff, like guns or pills, that you're having a better life. And this is not true. And I don't like people when they say, these pills are keeping me alive. I had a father-in-law that took oxycodone and Xanax, and he was high, and he didn't feel the fact he had walking pneumonia. He couldn't feel his own body. That's why you have pain, so you can feel yourself and feel what's going on. He's walking around high as a kite, no pain at all. And then it was too late. His lungs were too congested. That was it. So again, it's rampant materialism. And I'm glad the president is trying to make some statement that, having a bunch of pills doesn't make your life any safer. And don't tell me stuff like, these pills are keeping me alive. Some may be keeping you alive and others are not keeping you alive. And you can get a tolerance to drugs. You can take them, you have to have more and more, even if they're prescription. You get, it's not, you get a tolerance. So it's materialism, and it's, there are other branches of medicine like surgery and stuff like that. So that's all I'm going to say.
Thank you. Appreciate it, all three of you. Thank you, Commissioner Novick.
And the last person is Wayne Wigness.
Good morning.
My name is Wayne Wigness. Over the years, I've seen a number of friends go down this road. Funny thing I've noticed is when a larger body of community is allowed to form, they have a way of cleaning themselves up. This is a well-known principle upon which AA meetings are built on, for example. Out here on the streets, I've seen it occur in a natural fashion. And when it's broken up, no offense, but by you guys, it's not long after that you can't recognize the person you've seen because there's nothing left for them to do but drugs, and there's no one left to associate with but the wrong people. It's ironic how we rely on social service agencies that neatly divide people between old and young, homeless, non-homeless, addict versus non-addict. It's ironic because you might say we were evolved to feed off of one another. The old gain vitality from the young learn from the old, the addict gains positive energy from the clean and sober, etc. People need help. I'm sorry, people need each other, not help. And they don't need someone pointing the finger at Big Pharma for their problems. But where have our meeting grounds gone to? What am I to do if I cannot normalize a culture in which the local bar or the local house party full of drugs is if I cannot normalize that without becoming an addict myself? Well, apparently the only answer to that question is to point the finger at the people who happen to be selling us the pills. You members of council know where I'm coming from on this, so too you may understand why I see the hypocrisy in it all. Everybody wants change, yet everybody wants privacy, and everybody's willing to be organized in order to achieve it. Yet we maintain the right to point the finger at the man who's organizing us. 90% of what it takes to keep the domesticated man happy is to grant him his own box. The other 10%, that's what we call politics. That's where all the drama comes in. Let's blame Wall Street for our problems. Let's blame Donald Trump. And today we're blaming Big Pharma. There are a few things more apparent than the domesticated man's.
Pull back a little bit from the mic. That way we can hear you better.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Than the domesticated man's compulsion to blame somebody else for his own problems. But all of these things, Trump included, are cultural phenomena that we helped create every day. Just because you didn't vote for him doesn't mean you didn't help make him president. And just because you didn't sell them a pill doesn't mean you didn't help make them an addict. Now, I have a prediction to make. We let our strategy become one of pointing the finger at Big Pharma for our problems today. Tomorrow, they'll respond by finding a new way to make more money like they always do. Happy President's Day, Portland.
Thank you. Is there anybody else, Carla?
That's all who signed up.
Very good.
Mayor,
Please
I move the amendment.
Commissioner Fish has, you already moved the amendment.
It's
It's
seconded.
been moved and seconded, so we'll take, if you could call the roll on the amendment, please.
Mayor?
Commissioner Salzman.
Before we call the roll, can we hear from the attorney about her thoughts about the amendment?
Certainly.
So I checked with the attorneys handling litigation. They don't have any concerns. I also confirmed, normally we wouldn't have something that's different to the title. I can't think of the technical term, but because it's a resolution, not an ordinance, it's okay to add this as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Very good. Call the roll on the amendment, please.
Fish.
Former Commissioner Novick, thank you for joining us today and for your very powerful testimony, and I'm honored to support this amendment. Aye.
Saltzman.
Thank you, Commissioner Novick, for bringing this forward. Aye.
Udaley.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The amendment's adopted. To the main motion, call the roll.
Fish.
Mayor Wheeler, thank you for taking the lead with the City Attorney's Office in bringing this forward and rallying all of your colleagues to the cause. I have some prepared remarks that I want to share that are the product of work done by my Chief of Staff, Sonia Schmansky, and by our tribal liaison, Laura John. And I think it's particularly important that we highlight another dimension of this epidemic that I would not have known about had Laura John, our tribal liaison, not shared this story with us. Of course, I'm very proud of today's action and for the leadership it shows, and I'm grateful that Commissioner Novick has helped us strengthen the resolution. But I want to highlight, Mayor, briefly one aspect of this crisis that has been, in my perspective, underreported. Portland is home to the 9th largest Native American population in the country. Our Native community is descended from more than 380 tribes and adds an incalculable richness to our city and region. This community is also uniquely affected by the opioid crisis. The affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians, which represents 57 sovereign governments across the Northwest United States, held its winter convention in Portland last month. During that convention, the group passed a resolution declaring, quote, support for tribal nations taking on big pharma to combat the opioid epidemic in Indian country, end quote. And I want to quote from 2 findings from their resolution. Quote, whereas the opioid epidemic claims lives in such a way that cumulatively threatens to decimate our individual nations, as the death rate of American Indians from opioid overdose is the highest of any racial demographic, stealing the lives of 8.4 American Indians per every 100,000 in 2014. And, quote, whereas the conduct of pharmaceutical companies has caused a health crisis in Indian country that threatens the health, welfare, and economic security and political integrity of the tribal nations and their citizens, end quote. Pretty powerful stuff. The opioid crisis commands our attention and our action. This lawsuit is about recovering damages for the costs we've incurred managing this issue, and it also makes an important public statement. Over the last generation, the federal government has abandoned local communities time and time again, disinvesting in affordable housing, homelessness services, crumbling roads and bridges, and urgent public health crises ranging from pollution in our rivers to drugs on our streets. None of us in this room has the power to compel the federal government, and in particular this administration, to do the right thing and to appropriately regulate this industry. But we do have a voice, and collectively our voices have power. Today, I proudly stand with my colleagues and with communities across the country calling for accountability and for action in the face of this crisis. Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaley.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm also very pleased to see this come forward. Marketing and overprescription of opioids is a truly despicable act of exploitation. It's mind-boggling listening to some of these statistics and stories. Entities we trust with our health are preying on our pain and leaving a wake of ruin, grief, and untold costs to families and communities. So I'm very pleased to vote aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The resolution is adopted as amended. Thank you, everybody. It's my understanding that the presenters for item 172 are not here. Is that correct? Can we move 172 to next week then? Do we need a time certain for that, or can we just move it? All right, we'll move item 172. Why don't you read it, Carla, just so people know what we're talking about.
Sorry. 172, accept recommendations of the Special Appropriations Committee for grant award from the $350,000 allocated to competitive Special Appropriations Program during the fall bump process.
Very good. Item 173, please.
Authorize a competitive solicitation and contract with the lowest responsible bidder and provide payment for the construction of Portsmouth University Park Sewer Rehabilitation, project number E10335, for an estimated cost of $4,110,000.
And this is a second reading. Is there any further discussion on this item? Please call the roll.
Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaley.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The ordinance is adopted. Next item, 174, please.
Authorize a contract with Santec Consulting Services, Inc. in the amount of $749,190 for the North Willamette Boulevard Bridge Main Replacement Project.
Commissioner Fish.
Thank you, Mayor. We're pleased to be joined today by Teresa Elliott, the Chief Engineer of the Portland Water Bureau, who's going to give us a brief presentation on this matter. This ordinance would authorize the Portland Water Bureau to authorize a professional, technical, and expert contract for the Willamette Boulevard Bridge main replacement project. The consultant under contract would design and develop plans and specifications for a construction contract to replace the 20-inch cast iron pipeline crossing the Willamette Boulevard Bridge, which is in need of repair. I will just give you a preview, colleagues, that this what seems like a fairly dry matter issue is actually a lot more interesting, and Teresa is here to walk us through it. Welcome.
Good morning, Mayor.
Good morning.
Actually, good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. For the record, I'm Teresa Elliott, Chief Engineer, Portland Water Bureau. I'm talking about the seeking your approval for the professional, technical, and expert contract with Stantec for engineering services associated with the Willamette Boulevard Bridge main replacement project. We have an existing 20-inch pipe, cast iron pipe, that it is attached to a bridge that's owned by Burlington North Santa Fe Railroad Company over the Willamette Boulevard. The 20-inch pipe is sized at the margins between what we serve for our distribution system and our supply system, and this pipe is in very poor condition. We made some repairs a couple years ago to tide us over while we did the permanent design and replacement of the project. This pipeline serves about 5,000 customers in the North Portland, St. John's, and Cathedral Park neighborhoods, as well as a bunch of commercial and industrial customers in the Rivergate area. The pipe also provides us an alternate connection to our 36-inch St. John's crossing of the Willamette River that serves the west side of Portland. This project will include a 24-inch pipe that we're taking it off of the bridge and burying it underneath the railroad tracks. We're going to bore under the tracks, and we will increase our overall resiliency in the North Portland area. The solicitation that we used for this project was used the City of Portland's procurement methods for qualifications-based selection. For PT contracts. We received 2 proposals. Stantec was the most qualified responsive proposer. Their contract amount is for $749,190. They will be using 7 sub-consultants, 4 of which are certified DMWESB consultants, and they're expected to perform 20% of the work and meeting or exceeding the city's aspirational goals. We have a level of confidence for the project at this point, since we're starting design, of low to moderate. Once we finish design, we will be adjusting our cost estimates and adjust our level of confidence. This project will be constructed using the design bid build methodology, and during design, the project team will work with our outreach folks with the neighbors and the public that are affected by the project to minimize impacts to them as much as we can. And at this point, we don't have any known concerns or issues with the neighbors. And I'm available to answer questions.
I had one question, Chief Elliott. You alluded to this in your comments, but is it fair to say that when we have an opportunity to take a pipe of this significance and take it off a bridge, in this case a railroad bridge, and instead bury it, that advances our resilience goals?
Yes, so replacing the pipe advances our resilience goals, but taking off of any bridge and burying it underneath is by far the safer, more resilient approach than actually having it attached to the bridge.
And we have a lot of pipes that are on bridges for which we pay a fee. This happens to be a bridge owned by the railroads, and so we're essentially, for which we once upon a time paid a fee. So we're decoupling the pipe from the bridge, we're burying it, and we're upgrading the pipe. Is that correct?
That is correct. We will still pay a fee for crossing the railroad, but we are decoupling it from the bridge.
Thank you.
So this is for the design work, is that correct?
That is correct.
And so will you come back to the council, or does this authorize you, once the design work is completed, to actually continue with the work?
This authorizes us for engineering services during design and construction support services. We will be coming back to you for the construction contract, which is probably in the $4 million range.
And what's the time frame for that?
Probably 2020.
2020. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions on this item? Very Good. This is a first reading. Oh, I'm sorry, is there any public testimony on this item?
No one signed up.
Very good. This is a first reading of a non-emergency ordinance. It moves to second reading.
Thank you, Teresa.
Please call item number 175. Thank you. Great presentation.
Authorize application to the Oregon Office of State Fire Marshal for a grant in the amount of $62,924 for flammable liquids bulk storage specialty training for Portland Fire and Rescue hazmat technicians and Station 24 firefighters.
Very good. Commissioner Saltzman, did you have any introductory comments?
No introductory comments. I don't know whether anybody from Fire and Rescue is there.
Yep, they're standing
okay.
by. Yep, very good. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners. My name is Sean Christensen. I'm the hazmat coordinator for Portland Fire and Rescue, and I'm here to discuss this agenda item with and answer any questions you may have.
Colleagues, any
Could you
further
remind
questions?
us where Station 24 is?
Station 24 is over off of Interstate Boulevard near Swan Island. So they are set up for either shipboard or flammable liquid incidents.
Good, thank you.
Very good. Any further questions? Do we have any public testimony on this item?
No one signed up.
Please call the roll.
Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The ordinance is adopted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item, 176.
Update Auditor Code to conform to May 2017 charter amendments that protect the auditor's independence and add a duty. Amend Auditor Code following passage of new state law that preserves city's privilege when information is disclosed to auditor for the purposes of an audit or investigation.
Very good. Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. I am City Auditor Mary Hall Caballero. I'm here today to close the circle on recent electoral and legislative successes for the city, which we set out to achieve more than a year ago. In May, voters approved charter amendments that you referred to the ballot at my request to increase the independence of the auditor's office. 1 month later, Governor Brown signed into law protections the city pursued that will allow auditors and investigators in the auditor's office access to city information without causing legal protections to be waived. The changes before you update city code to reflect the charter amendments, which included allowing the auditor to seek independent legal advice, giving the auditor more autonomy over staffing decisions, designating the auditor as a contracting agency, and authorizing the auditor to submit directly to council budget requests based on the auditor's priorities. I'm also asking you to codify the right of full access to information to independent police review and the lobbyist and political consultant registration programs. This is a right that you've already extended to audit services and the ombudsman through the charter amendments. I'm asking that you do the same for the other investigative functions in my office that exist only in code, knowing that that state law now protects the city's most sensitive information from disclosure. Before I take your questions, allow me to repeat my thanks to you for the critical role that City Council played in paving the way for voters to consider the charter amendments and pursuing the legislative change that both removed a barrier to our audits and investigations and strengthened the city's ability to protect legally privileged information. I commend this council for its commitment to accountability and transparency.
Madam Auditor, is this the first time you've appeared before council with your new counsel?
With my new counsel?
Your new attorney?
Yes.
Shall we introduce him?
Yes. This is Todd Albert. He's the general counsel to the auditor's office.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners.
Good morning. It's good to see you again.
I liked him immediately when I met him, Mayor. He did a stint as a public defender in Manhattan.
Ah, very good. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Any further questions for the auditor? Well, I appreciate the review that you've given me and my team on this. I think these are all common sense adaptations based on the public record we've already established and the goals we've already established together. So I think this is good work. Is there any public testimony on this item, Carla, before I move it?
Yes, one person signed up. Dan Handelman.
Come on up, sir. Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor and members of council. I'm Dan Handelman with Portland Cop Watch. And we're not 100% clear about the difference between the existing code and what's happening with this in terms of the sharing of confidential documents with third parties. We want to make absolutely sure, though, that the Citizen Review Committee, which is not mentioned in the code or the charter as having access to such confidential documents, does not get shut out from being able to review the confidential documents that they are reviewing at this point. So I don't know if that requires another code change or another legal analysis of some kind, but it's of grave concern that, I look through the existing code and I don't see anything that even says, beyond the fact that they have to pass a background check, that the CRC has access to confidential files. So I just want to make sure that's not going to be affected. It's also important that the city attorney, or the auditor's attorney, came to the table. We hadn't realized that she had hired an attorney. Was something that Portland Cop Watch and other people in the community have pushed for a long time, to ensure that there's true independence by IPR. I'm not sure if that's related to why the city attorney's office stopped sending a representative to CRC meetings lately, but it would be nice to get some public airing of why that's happened. 2 months ago, they said they weren't going to show up, and then 2 people showed up, and 1 went away. And then this past month, there was no city attorney at the CRC meeting. And, it's helpful to have that for legal advice when they're deciding on the fate of officers, whether or not they violated policy. Now I just have a minute left, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened last week, where their auditor had the OIR group present to City Council. First of all, just for clarification, that part of the ordinance was not included when the first IPR ordinance was passed. The City Council had to direct City Auditor Gary Blackmer to add something about shootings and deaths, and he decided to have those reviews done rather than let the CRC have appeals of deadly force cases. So that's another sensitive issue for the public, and we want to make sure that you keep that on your radar. It's also the fact that we were not allowed to give oral testimony at council last week is the first time in 15 years we haven't been able to do that on that particular matter. And I think it would be good for democracy if, instead of making a blanket policy around public testimony for reports, that the mayor ask the other members of council whether or not they want to take public testimony. I think there were a lot of people that were disappointed, and I'm very, very disappointed by the fact that the mayor's office put out that our saying there wasn't public testimony taken was untrue, because we meant public testimony at the city council, and it's just not appropriate for putting out on social media that there was untruths being spread around.
I'll take that at face value. Again, it is at the discretion of the presiding officer as to whether or not public testimony is provided. It has been my policy to accept public testimony for resolutions and first readings of ordinances, not reports or presentations. And the reason that I've stated for that is that we contract for a specific purpose for people to come back to us. They have an obligation to us to provide the information that we've asked for. And in fact, what OIR is charged with doing is reporting back to the city council. They could choose to do that simply by writing and sending us a report. I chose to have them provide that report in public so that people could hear what the conversation was, what their recommendations were, and what our questions were. And I further opened up the opportunity for public testimony through I opened up the opportunity for written testimony, and I assume I will receive quite a lot of written testimony related to the issue, which we will digest. But that was the call that I chose to make, and I'll stand behind it. I would like to ask the auditor to come back to address.
Mayor, can I just make one comment?
Commissioner Fish.
I also want to add that we did get extensive written testimony from Portland Cop Watch, from League of Women Voters, and others, and I found getting that testimony ahead of the hearing very helpful, and it actually informed some of the conversation we had with the OIR group. So I appreciated the fact that there was written testimony, and I think it was helpful to the process.
But Commissioner Fish, if I just might point out, though.
It was a comment to the mayor.
I understand, but the council's not allowed to meet at a social function when you have a quorum, and the only time that we get to have a dialogue among all of you is in these chambers. So cutting off the ability to have public oral testimony cuts out that ability to have that kind of interactive dialogue.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Madam Auditor, if you wouldn't mind, the question was raised, is there any retrenchment of current access that the Citizens Review Committee would have, or any intention to reduce their amount of access to documents as currently exists under the current ordinance?
No, the section of code that this amends does not apply to the Citizen Review Committee section. And also they operate off of confidential information. If you've ever gone to a CRC meeting, they aren't allowed to say the officers' names. And so they have access to the investigative file, and that is what they use to make a determination at the end of their hearing.
Very good. I appreciate that. And Mr. Handelman, I will have legal counsel get back to you directly with regard to why they were not in attendance at last month's meeting. I don't know the answer to that question right off, and I'm not sure that the counsel that is here present in the chambers today would necessarily know the answer to that. So I will direct legal counsel to get back to you directly. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Auditor.
I actually have the answer to that question.
Oh,
if you want
perfect.
to give it.
Excellent.
I discussed this with Tracy Reeve, and when someone from her office was attending the CRC meetings, they were there to answer questions about public meetings law. And what we decided was that if there was something that we would anticipate that would come up, that they would need to be there, that we would notify them, and City Attorney Reed would send someone to that meeting, but that they didn't need to, as a matter of course, come to every single meeting for that purpose. And when a volunteer on the Citizen Review Committee has a question, they submit them in writing, and members of the City Attorney's Office respond to their questions about the case file in writing, so that that's not being discussed in the open hearing.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Auditor, for that clarification. Thank you for your presentation. Colleagues, anything else? Very good. This is a first reading of a non-emergency ordinance. It moves to second reading. Thank you. And we are adjourned until 2 p.m. today.